What's up, everybody? Chris Pennell here. We're going with my quarterback tier rankings for week 12 of the fantasy football season. If you enjoy, make sure you leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. Let's dive right into it. And let me start this off by saying happy Thanksgiving to everybody that celebrates, and there's also no bye weeks this week as well, so we have two things to celebrate about. Let's start with the S tier. We have four guys to make the cut this week. Number one for me most weeks is going to be Patrick Mahomes, and that's no different this time around. He draws a weird spot versus the Raiders where I'm not really scared of their defense in the slightest. But at the same time, they've actually been pretty tough versus quarterbacks. But we saw last week when you have an elite offense with elite weapons, they can still put up plenty of points. Like a lot of people were scared about Tua last week versus the Raiders defense because they were allowing like the 6th fewest points per game in the position. Didn't matter, still threw for over 300 yards and multiple passing touchdowns. Sometimes talent can overcome bad matchups when you have Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, even though they had a really weird game versus the Philadelphia Eagles. All things should be good to go here. 27-point implied team total on the road in Vegas, 9.5-point favorites, and on the season, about 260 yards and 2 passing touchdowns per game for Patrick Mahomes. But outside of Travis Kelce, his weapons are horrible. And MVS sold the game last night versus Philly as well. And speaking of Philly, we have Jalen Hurts coming in at number 2, and his floor is unmatched by anybody else. That's why he's always going to be in the top 3 every single week, no matter the matchup. Decent spot versus Buffalo, though. I'm not really too scared of their defense at this point in the season. They're playing at home, 26-point implied team total, 3.5-point spread in this one, 250 yards and 1.5 passing touchdowns per game for Jalen Hurts. What we care the most about is this rushing upside. 35 yards on the ground per game, over 7 design runs, and that's not counting scrambles, and nearly 1 rushing touchdown per game. And any single time they're on the goal line, it's always going to be a threat for Jalen Hurts to find the end zone. And if you take away the week 1 matchup versus New England for Jalen Hurts, where he scored around 13 fantasy points, he's been right around, if not more, 20 fantasy points or more the rest of the season. So high floor, high ceiling, you can't ask for much more. And speaking of this same game, we have Josh Allen here, the Buffalo Bills, who draws a great matchup versus the Eagles defense, who has been really rough versus the pass this season, allowing the 4th most points per game to the quarterback position at 21.5, 270 passing yards and over 2 passing touchdowns. I know the turnovers can be a bit of an issue for Josh Allen, but he's still a fantasy superstar week in, week out at the quarterback position. He offers you rushing touchdown upside. Hasn't been really running the ball as much, only averaging 25 rushing yards per game this season on 2 designed runs, but over half a rushing touchdown per game, still completing nearly 70% of his passes, throwing the ball close to 33 times per game, 260 yards and 2 passing touchdowns with rushing upside. I'll take that in a great matchup all day. Then rounding out the S tier, we have Lamar Jackson of the Baltimore Ravens. Now, there is some downside here. We did lose Mark Andrews, who's definitely a big proponent of that passing offense. Isaiah Likely will hopefully slide in nicely, although he's not going to be direct replacement, but still a nice 25.25 implied team total for the Ravens on the road in LA, who we know has a terrible defense all around. They're bad versus the run, they're bad versus the pass. They're allowing the 2nd most points per game in the quarterback position, over 300 passing yards per game and 23 fantasy points. And Lamar's been great on the ground this season, over 5 design runs, nearly 50 rushing yards per game, which is a great floor, nearly half a rushing touchdown, and still getting a 220 through the air and a passing touchdown per game, only on 25 passing attempts. So while we don't really care what he does through the air, it's always icing on the cake in addition to his rushing upside. And moving on to the A tier, we have Dak Prescott on Thanksgiving Day, who's in a dream matchup versus the Washington Commanders defense, who's allowing the most points per game in the quarterback position at 23, 270 passing yards and over 2 passing touchdowns. We know the Cowboys passing attack has been on fire the past month now. Now you give them the best matchup in the world in primetime football on Thanksgiving when everyone's eating dinner. Yeah, sign me up for the Cowboys offense here. We also have C.J. Stroud of the Houston Texans. The rookie is setting the world on fire, has looked excellent. Did have 3 interceptions last week, but I love the quote he said, "We're shoot or shoot," and he's just going to keep on shooting, and that he did. They won the game, and this is a great spot versus Jacksonville. He's averaging nearly 300 passing yards per game on the season, and him and Tank Dell are it's just a good combo to watch out there, rookie to rookie. Hopefully they're going to be studs for years to come. But we have a 1.5-point spread here, 47-point over-under, which is one of the highest of the entire week. So it should be back and forth for the most part. And the Jaguars are allowing the 5th most points per game in the position, so nothing really not to like here from this game. Then we also have Justin Fields of the Chicago Bears. Great game versus Detroit. Now, he does have a really good history versus Detroit, and we have seen them struggle with mobile quarterbacks. I did mention that in last week's video. But this is another good spot versus Minnesota, as they're pretty much middle of the road versus fantasy quarterbacks this season, but it's mainly all about the rushing upside here for Justin Fields. Smaller sample size this season because he has been injured, but he's averaging nearly 50 rushing yards per game and over 6 designed runs and getting you close to 200 passing yards. Plus, this game will be in prime time, so at least it'll be fun to watch. And then rounding out our A tier, we have 2 guys who are pretty similar quarterbacks, I think. We have Jared Goff and Brock Purdy. Both guys run their system pretty well. Are they the most amazing QBs out there? No, but they get the job done. They do draw somewhat tougher matchups this week, fantasy-wise. More so Jared Goff. Brock Purdy is more of an average spot, to maybe even above average a little bit. So I guess I'll just reserve that for Jared Goff. But he gets the Green Bay Packers here on the afternoon slate for Thanksgiving. 27-point implied team total, which I do like, 7.5-point favorites, 275 passing yards per game, 33 attempts and nearly 70% completion percentage. And there's no shortage of weapons in Detroit. Amon-Ra St. Brown's an absolute stud. Sam Laporta's a great tight end. Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield. You have some decent wide receiver 2-3 options that can at least get the job done. But the Packers are allowing the 6th fewest points to gain the position, and they're much softer versus the run than they are versus the pass. So this could be a really big game on the ground for both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. So that's my only concern there. And he would be higher if it was a better matchup, but I still think he deserves to be a QB1 with the high implied team total. Then we have Brock Purdy going up against Seattle also on the Thanksgiving slate. 25-point implied team total here for the 49ers on the road in Seattle. 270 passing yards per game and nearly 2 passing touchdowns for Brock Purdy. Only throwing the ball 25 times per game, but the touchdowns have been there because this is a very efficient offense and he's an efficient quarterback. And he's at nearly 10 yards per attempt this season with a 70% completion percentage. And obviously no shortage of weapons here with CMC out of the backfield, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk is an absolute stud. And Seattle is currently 18th versus quarterbacks this year, so I am fine with Purdy as a startable QB this week. Moving on to our B tier, we have Kyler Murray, who just recently returned from injury, and he's been great for fantasy purposes, 18 and 22 fantasy points. And what makes him special is that he can run the football. So it's always going to give you that kind of floor with guys like Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson that they have. He's got a rushing touchdown in both weeks so far, 6 runs and 7. We're looking at the designed runs, it's 3.5 per game, averaging 230 passing yards, throwing the ball nearly 30 times per game. Completion percentage has been low, but when you're getting over 40 rushing yards per game, you're just going to have fantasy relevance. It's a pretty good matchup versus Los Angeles Rams, who are pretty average to below average versus the pass and fantasy quarterbacks this season. 23-point implied team total for the Cardinals at home, and a tight spread at 1.5 points, so it should be back and forth, and I am a fan of this game overall. Then we have Justin Herbert of the Los Angeles Chargers, and typically he'd be a bit higher, but this is a brutal matchup at home versus the Baltimore Ravens. Only 21.25 implied team total. They're 4-point dogs. A nice 46.5-point over-under, which is one of the higher ones of the week. But man, the Ravens are tough versus quarterbacks, allowing the fewest points per game at 12.8, 201 passing yards and less than 1 passing touchdown. The volume will be there for Justin Herbert, and Keenan Allen's a stud. But outside of that, there's really not that many weapons because Quentin Johnston's terrible. He dropped the game-winning touchdown, or at least putting them in field goal position last week. And then Joshua Palmer's hurt. Then you have Jalen Guyton, I guess. Joe Everett, Donald Parham. I mean, not really much. And Austin Eckler looks slow. I saw a picture of him breaking down the sideline, and he looks slower than like Mike Tolbert out there, if you guys remember him. So not a ton of weapons out there, but Keenan Allen's a stud, and I'm sure he'll still eat. Tua, he's in a similar situation as Justin Herbert, where he's a great fantasy quarterback that can put up points every single week, and they do have a 25-point implied team total here, 9.5 point favorites on the road versus New York, but they're also really tough versus quarterbacks, allowing the 9th fewest points per game at 15.5. I am fine with either. Justin Herbert does offer more rushing upside, which is why I'm giving him the slight edge over Tua, but he's averaging nearly 300 passing yards per game, and it was a tough matchup last week versus the Raiders, and he was still fine throwing for over 300 yards and multiple passing touchdowns. It's just when you have Tyreek Hill, I mean, that can just open up your entire offense despite the matchup. Then Trevor Lawrence, great game last week. That's the breakout performance we were looking for all season from Trevor. Good matchup here versus Houston in what should be a pretty back and forth game. They're currently ranked 25th versus quarterbacks, and this game features a 1.5 point spread, 47.5 over under, and 2 young quarterbacks duking it out. I think we're in for a treat. Moving on to our C tier, we have Josh Dobbs of the Minnesota Vikings, who's basically Kyler Murray out there. He's getting you around 40 rushing yards per game. He's getting to the end zone every single week on the ground. 5 straight weeks now we have a rushing touchdown and getting you roughly 200 passing yards per game. Probably less passing upside than Kyler Murray. But if he gets Justin Jefferson back this week by chance, that's a major upgrade for Josh Dobbs. And 24.25 implied team total for the Vikings at home versus the Bears, who are currently 27th versus fantasy quarterbacks. So it's a good matchup. He's been playing good ball. And for fantasy purposes, with his rushing upside, that's going to keep him in the QB1 conversation, but more so a high-end QB2 in my opinion. Sam Howell of the Washington Commanders, he's also been great for fantasy purposes this season, averaging over 275 passing yards per game, throwing the ball a ton, more than any other quarterback on this list, 37 times per game, 66% completion percentage. Doesn't run the ball a ton, but is getting you around 20 yards on the ground per game. Now, my only concern is that this is a brutal matchup versus the Cowboys. They're allowing these 6 fewest points per game in the position, with them being 10.5 point dogs on the road, 19 point implied team total. They should be throwing the ball a ton, which bodes well for Sam Howell. And then in the D tier, we're going to start with Baker Mayfield of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's a pretty good matchup versus the Indianapolis Colts pass defense. He's currently 20th versus quarterbacks, allowing nearly 20 fantasy points per game at 250 and 1 passing touchdown. And when you have Mike Evans, you can just tug the ball. I'm sure he'll find the end zone. Chris Godwin's good, but they just really haven't connected well this season. But I'm fine with Baker here. 20.25 implied team total, and in the dome in Indianapolis, so no weather to be concerned about. Then Matthew Stafford going up against Arizona Cardinals, who we know their pass defense is Swiss cheese this season, currently ranking 21st versus the position, going 240 and over 1.5 passing touchdowns per game. Now, the problem with Stafford is that they just don't really get too many passing touchdowns whatsoever. And the status of Cooper Kupp is going to be big this week. If he happens to be out, you can definitely downgrade Stafford a little bit. But if he does happen to be in, it's a really easy spot on the road in Arizona. 21.5 implied team total, 1.5 point spread. So it should be back and forth, but keep an eye on the status of Cooper Kupp. Tried to get back into the game last week, but just couldn't quite get there. Moving on to the F tier for quarterbacks 18, 19, and 20. At 18, I have Jordan Love. And while I think he's an awful NFL quarterback, he at least has weapons, a good offensive line, and a decent matchup this week as the Lions are currently ranked 26 versus fantasy quarterbacks. And this game does feature a 46.5 point over-under, which is one of the higher ones of the week. And with them being 7.5 point dogs and Aaron Jones being hurt, they're probably going to be throwing the ball quite a bit in this game, so I don't hate it for Jordan Love. Hopefully you don't have to start him, but if you do, well, best of luck. Gardner Minshew comes in at number 19 for me. Great matchup versus the Buccaneers, who are allowing the third most points per game to the quarterback position. We just saw Brock Purdy have a fantastic game versus them. And I'm not saying Gardner Minshew is Brock Purdy, nor is the Indianapolis Colts offense quite the San Francisco 49ers, but they do have a 23-point implied team total here, 2.5 point spread in this one, and they're allowing 290 yards and over 1.5 passing touchdowns per game on the season. Then Derek Carr, if he happens to be good to go, he's still in concussion protocol. Matchup versus Atlanta, it's all right. They're 22nd versus quarterbacks, allowing nearly 20 points per game. Low passing yardage, but they're allowing a decent chunk of passing touchdowns, and they're not generating too many turnovers as well, only half an interception per game, which is tied for the lowest on this list. While Carr is a very boring quarterback, we have seen him get there several times this year with roughly around 20 fantasy points. He's got great weapons. They have Kamara out of the backfield, Chris Olave, Shaheed, Michael Thomas, and you also have Taysom Hill, who's a jack of all trades. But with that being said, that's all I got for today's video, so I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure you like down below, subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. Wish you all the best of luck this week, and no matter whatever you're doing, have a great Thanksgiving, and I'll see you all next time.